Beep, beep. Who got the keys to the Jeep? Not head coach Scott Drew or the Baylor Bears. Why he declined a gift from a local auto group. The 2021 NFL Draft is approaching. Spare us the traumatic storylines. Are they really necessary? We discuss. And a shooting at an 11 and under AAU tournament. Something has to change. We discuss that and more right here on Fourth and Just Us. Welcome to Fourth and Just Us. We are so glad that you are able to join us again for another episode where we like to converse and intertwine the conversations between politics, race, and sports. Lericia Harris here alongside a former athletic director, Kevin Anderson, as well as the professor himself, Dr. Leonard Moore. Again, we welcome you to the show. And if you're watching us on Facebook Live or YouTube, we hope that you like us on Facebook. Don't forget to do that there. If you're on YouTube, click that subscribe button. And also remember that you can comment throughout the show. We also like to take your questions. So if you have any questions, make sure you drop them in the comment section on whatever social platform that you are watching us live right now. But we would like to begin the show on a serious note. We know that former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 charges against him in the killing of George Floyd. Now, what's next? We know that Chauvin will be sentenced in 8 weeks. He faces up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, up to 25 years for third-degree murder, and up to 10 years for manslaughter. AD, when you heard the verdict yesterday, what was your reaction?
You know, unfortunately, it was relief because no telling what might have happened if they would have found him not guilty. You know, the sad part about it all is that, you know, the Floyd family lost their father, their husband, their brother. And so, you know, it's just, it's, you know, it left me kind of just cold because, you know, it was senseless and that these kind of things definitely should not be happening.
Well, for me, Lericia, you know, I sat down and watched it. I think my son, who's 15, was upstairs. My other daughter was outside. Me and my wife were watching it. And it took me back to when they announced the Trayvon Martin verdict, you know, several years ago. And here's the thing that hit me. Here we are, 2022. The video is out. It's clear that this officer murdered this guy. But in 2022, we are sitting there hoping that justice is served. And so the question is, what kind of indictment is that upon our criminal justice system? You know, I mean, we were celebrating yesterday like the folks used to celebrate when they would get around the radio and listen to a Joe Louis boxing match. You know, and so I am encouraged, though, because finally we had officers break that blue wall of silence. You had those officers testifying for the prosecution saying, we weren't trained like that. That ain't what we do. We don't know what that was about. But that's not who we are as police officers. And I think the testimony of current police officers on the force was very instrumental in securing that conviction.
I saw a lot of people tweet out and respond saying accountability. Now, we know that this verdict will not erase the millions of injustices that so many within our community, the Black community, have faced, ones that weren't recorded, ones that weren't caught on camera. But there was still some sort of hope from this verdict, right? Why was this case so important, Doc?
To me, it was the most important case in America since the Emmett Till case in 1955 in Mississippi. And we know that those people in Mississippi got off for killing Emmett Till. But for me, it was, if you think about the Rodney King trial and the Rodney King, where those officers were acquitted, that was 1993. And what that did in many ways, or 92, what that did in many ways, it basically, for another generation of young African Americans, it basically showed them this is who the police are. You can't trust them, and you always got to have your guard up. I was fearful that if Chauvin were acquitted, then we would have another generation of African Americans growing up despising the police. But here's the piece. I also hope it was a sign to young officers who make up in their mind and say, you know what, we're going to change this narrative around bad policing, around police misconduct and police murder?
You know, what it tells me is that anytime you're stopped by the police, you need to get this out and you need to record it. Had those people not recorded what happened to Mr. Floyd, I think the verdict would have been different yesterday.
And for me, I like this barbershop advice, Lericia. One thing I tell everybody, I told my daughters, I tell my students and friends, if an officer pulls you over, pull out your phone and call 911 and say, can you please send a supervisor out because I don't know why this officer stopped me. And what somebody said is that when you call 911, now there is a record that has been established, right? And now a supervisory officer is coming out on the scene, and that may give you a little bit more protection than if you don't call 911.
Well, we know that now so many are waiting to see if this particular moment of rare hope will spur some political leaders to deliver on their end as it pertains to reforming policy and eradicating systemic racism and just police training in general. Going forward, Doc, what is your hope as it pertains to the trainings of policing and the changes that need to be made in that particular area?
Well, I want to challenge the Biden administration to step up because we all know that it was the black vote that got him in office, okay? And it was the black vote, Lericia, in your home state of Georgia, right, that gave us the Democrats a majority in the Senate. Biden got to step up. And too often, Lericia, what we see is that black folk are always the tipping point in these elections, but we never get our issues addressed. There is always, well, we got to wait and see. We got to work across the aisle. No, do what you got to do, President Biden. If it's executive order, if it's getting rid of the filibuster, do what you got to do to get legislation passed. So in many ways, we can live up to what was in the Declaration of Independence.
Well, we have to make a point of making these people do what we need to have done. Leonard, you just said we elected these folks. And if they don't have our voice and they're not pushing our agenda, then shame on us as well. Because we definitely see how, as you said, the outcome came in these elections because we got people out to vote. And the reason why Donald Trump is not in office today is because we got out and voted for Joe.
Lericia, here's what happens. And I got on my professor hat. Here's what happens, Lericia. During campaign season, I'm black. You want the black vote. We got to get the black vote out. But now you get in office and it's like, well, I got to govern for everybody. I don't want to be polarizing. I don't want to be divisive. But you didn't say that when you were campaigning. And Derek Bell has a great book. It's called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. We do all the struggle. We do all the voting. We lead all the protests. And other groups often get all their stuff addressed while we are at the bottom of the well just looking up.
You know, Doc Rivers said it best. Why doesn't America love us? Because we love America.
Wow. Come on, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I've seen so many within the Black community respond to this verdict, right? Again, it was some sort of a spare moment of hope, but we still have a long way to go, right? What would you say are the next steps as it pertains to the African American community and what we need to do to sort of keep this momentum going, AD?
Well, we have to make sure that these voter registration laws are not passed in these different houses, and that we have to demand that we don't want any change. You know, Lericia, we kind of joked about it, we laughed, but what kind of statement does it make that you pass a law and written into it, if you give somebody a bottle of water, we're going to arrest you? Yeah. I mean, that's just, how ridiculous is that? And how far back have we moved from the 60s? I mean, it's just unbelievable, sometimes where we are. Doc and I talked about this a little bit. in a way, it might be more harmful that Donald Trump is out of office now because we might start to relax. And
Absolutely.
we can't afford to relax. I mean, we've got to take this thing head on and move it forward. We have Sister Harris as vice president now. We have to take account of giving her the power and the issues that we need to get things done. Because, we just can't continue to let this happen. And particularly these young folks, they're so in tune to what's going on now. I don't think they're going to let it happen.
Lericia, my thing is, you hear these calls about, reallocating police resources. Some people say defund the police. And, but the funny thing is, we don't know how, this is all we know what police do, traffic stops and all that. But, I'm encouraged, Lericia, because I hear people talking about, you don't need to send a police officer out if there's a domestic disturbance. You don't need to send them out if somebody's having a mental health crisis. So I like this idea of reform I'm beginning to hear about, because, it's right. You don't have to send somebody out there with a gun. If you send a social worker out there yesterday where those sisters were fighting, even though the sister got a knife in her hand, you're not going to shoot and kill the sister. You will find a way to de-escalate or break up the fight. And so I am encouraged that these Black Lives Matter folks are on the front line, and we got to give them credit. And here's my thing. You don't have to agree with everything they do, all right? But you got to give some of these folks credit. And what I remind a lot of my Black professional peers is that power concedes nothing without a demand. And a lot of the gains that we made in many ways were because we were demanding action, and in many ways we were protesting and having marches in the streets.
I'm glad you mentioned the teenager, Doc. Ma'Khia Bryant was the teenager in Columbus, Ohio, who, while we were awaiting the verdict for Derek Chauvin, lost her life after it is said she called police for help as it pertains to a fight or some sort happening outside of her home. Or when police arrive, unfortunately, she was the one who lost her life. And I can truly speak from my heart and say that when I saw the body cam footage this morning after it was released, and it was released immediately, which has honestly been a little uncommon, but after watching it, all I could do was cry. I got so emotional, and I was messed up for a little while this morning after watching it, because it's heartbreaking. It's like, how much do we have to take? How much more do we have to see? Was there no other way for this particular situation to be de-escalated? No one's saying that there's a right or wrong in this particular situation as it pertains to the young lady. Some people are saying that she has a knife. They're trying to figure out exactly, what it is that's seen in this video. But I just don't believe that someone, a young girl, a teenager, had to lose her life because of this situation. AD, when you heard about this story,
called the police. And Lericia, she was the one who called the police, right?
Right. She was the one who called police for help.
Wow.
For help.
Wow.
Well,
So
let's
AD,
just go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let's just talk about what happened this past weekend in Chicago with that 13-year-old with his hands up, very clear, and they still shot him. Yeah. Now, he had, from what I understand and what I saw, there was no threat there. This young man had his hands up and he was shot to death. I mean, it's just, it takes the words out of your mouth. I mean, it's just, how do you explain this? I mean, and then I can't even imagine being a parent and having to go through this. And particularly, let's go back to Columbus, seeing your daughter shot to death in front of you. I mean, I don't know how anybody handles that kind of situation. It's just, I mean, it's a very sad commentary. The other thing that concerns me is that if you've been reading the paper about the white extremists in the military and how they're starting to have to weed them out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a totally
different. And but and they know that they're in there. That's the thing that's mind-boggling. It's not like they're surprised and they stumbled over and said, "Oh, hey, today I found out Leonard was a racist." No, they know. And I mean, this is our country.
This unfortunately is our country, and we're still dealing with certain comments like this. Want to transition over to one of the stories that I mentioned as we started the show. Over at Baylor, there was a general manager of the Allen Samuels Auto Group dealership in Waco, Ted Teague. He was interviewed for a local news station in that area and showed off a new Jeep that was sort of adorned in Baylor theme wrap to commemorate the program's first national championship. Now, this isn't something new that they just decided to do. It was something that was previously done, but for the women's coach, Kim Mulkey, after national championships, and they wanted to do the same for Coach Scott Drew. Now, during the interview, Teague made a comment about Drew being able to use this Jeep to help with recruiting. These were his words on live television. He said, enjoy it, and he'll use it to recruit and pull some people out of the hood. When you heard these comments, when you heard this statement, Doc, what was your reaction?
I mean, to me, Lericia, it just illustrates the gulf between the white booster and the black athlete. All right. And, first you get kind of offended, and it's because what he's basically saying is the only reason these guys are in college is because we went and got them out of the hood. And if we wouldn't have got them out of the hood, then they would be nothing. But here's the I want to give you some data, because here's the funny thing. It is becoming increasingly clear to me that at these large athletic powerhouses, the only way to get in as a black male is to be an athlete. So let me give you the data for some schools. And this is the percentage of black males at these institutions. Texas, where I teach, 1.6%. And I probably recruited all of them. Baylor, 2.4. Oklahoma, 1.7. USC, 2.0. Washington, 1.1. UCLA, 1.2. Georgia, 2.7. The Seminoles, 2.5. Texas A&M, 1.5, Michigan, 1.8%. The largest of the Power 5 schools is the University of Maryland, that has a 5.8% African-American male population. So for those of you listening, when we talk about Texas A&M 1.5, Oklahoma 1.7, if you walk into a classroom in Oklahoma with 100 students in it, 1.5 will be black males. And so increasingly, he may be right. Maybe they are pulling kids out of the hood, because it seems to me that is the only way for a black male to get in some of these elite institutions.
I don't even want to talk about it. It's not worth talking about. It's very offensive, and that, but this is what we deal with inside intercollegiate athletics. And it's a sad commentary. And Doc, I'm going to go back to what you just shared with us, that if it wasn't for the black male athlete, there would be no black male diversity on most of these campuses.
That's right.
I do want to mention that.
And to me, it's tragic. Me and my wife were, at an Oklahoma-Texas game, and Texas has great fans. We're at this game, Lericia, a couple years ago in Dallas, and we're standing there. There's an older white couple in front of me. Their sons are like in their 40s. So the son turns around and asks me, he says, is your son on the team? I said, no. Is your son on the team? And then I said, no. And he said, well, and he takes me through a series of questions, basically like, did you play at Texas? I said, no. Did you play at Texas? And my wife said, quit asking my husband those questions. You're just trying to find out how we got those tickets. And so it's all the time, whether I go to a Ohio State game, an LSU game, but if you are there, you must be there because your son is playing. So what I tell people, Lericia, I say, no, my son is not playing, but all those brothers down there, all those are my cousins.
Well, I do want to mention that Baylor's the head coach, Scott Drew, as well as the athletic director, Mac Rhodes, they released a statement declining, of course, this gift, saying that his comments did not align with the program's values. So we appreciate that stance from both the head coach and the athletic director as well. The 2021 NFL draft, it's approaching, but the traumatic storylines, are they really necessary? We know that during last year's coverage, it didn't take fans long to really notice the personal tragedies and the extremely sad stories that were sort of discussed as the league's newest players were introduced. Now, many of the fans took to Twitter and other social media, either joking about it, questioning, putting their comments of concern, and some were even upset by it. So as we prepare for this 2021 NFL coverage, right, should it pertain, or should they spare us the traumatic storylines, and are they really necessary? AD?
You being part of the media, I'd ask you first, what do you think? I'd love to hear what you think about this.
Well, we know that some of the overcoming stories, right, some of it is needed because that's the motivation from players. If that's a story that a player gives you, and that's a part of his reason why, I do think some of those stories should be shared. Now, to a dramatic extent where it's something that's constantly talked about throughout the entire coverage, no. And I vividly remember one specific instance that I didn't like from last year's coverage, and it was about T. Higgins. And on his Get to Know You sort of ID, there was this statement at the bottom where it talked about his mom's addiction. I didn't think that was necessary to be up there. Certain things just don't have to be said because we don't always want to see those stories. There are a lot of these young men too who have done and are doing great and wonderful things. And so if we can uplift and boost those stories more, I think that would be a better storyline or a better perspective, because people want to get to know the guys and what they're doing, right? They don't always want to hear the sad stories. And as a Black woman, I don't always want to see us displaying the harder, worst times of a person's life, especially if it's something that isn't needed to be put out there. If it's something that's very, very personal, I think maybe we could hold off on it.
I don't know, Lericia, my take is that I think the athletic industrial complex has created this big narrative that we would be nothing without sports. And you hear athletes say, well, if it wasn't for sports, man, I'd be dead or in jail. Man, quit disrespecting your family and your parents like that. I don't care how hard you grew up, but it's these narratives we hear over and over. And Lericia, what the funny thing is that it ties into the comment from the Baylor booster, right? If there's this big idea that we don't come from anything, that sports has been the saving grace, that mom was an addict, we never saw our dad, then it feeds that idea that Scott Drew can use this Jeep to get people out of the hood. My issue, Lericia, is that we have to stop this nonsense. We got to stop selling ourselves short like that. These student athletes, these athletes are multifaceted. They are talented. And when I remind them, playing football is not who you are. It is one thing that you do. But like you said, Lericia, I think it's good for ratings. And I think it makes the white sports industry feel good about itself because they really believe that in many ways they are saving Black kids. It's sort of this missionary complex.
Yeah, absolutely, Doc. You couldn't have said it better. Many of these people feel that they're saving these kids and that, this is a lifeline they're throwing out to them, and that, without us, they'd be those poor kids, in the ghetto, not doing anything or being anybody, and the narrative has to change. Because as you're saying, there's too many positive stories. I mean, working and being around these young people, I know what they've been able to do in life and who they are and what they're all about. And we need to tell those stories and not the other stories that really are meaningless in many ways.
You know what, Lericia, to some extent, I believe that we feed this narrative, because in the Black community, it's about having some degree of street cred. I know kids from suburban Houston and Dallas will lie that they're from the inner city. Like it's a badge of shame somehow to be from the suburbs. And folks, I'm suburban Cleveland Heights, Ohio. That is my DNA. All right. It's gotten a little hood now, but when I was coming through there, it was a little different. But here's the point. Lericia, remember when Kobe Bryant was coming up through the NBA? And remember they said he didn't fit in well. He was from, born and raised in Italy, was fluent in several languages. And I remember it seemed like, and this is going to sound crazy, it seemed like after when he caught that case in Colorado, I remember some reporter saying, it's like, wow, now Kobe has street kid cred because he caught a case. And I'm like, this is insane. So we have to really change this idea that being authentically Black means being from the hood.
Hey, Doc, you're absolutely right. I mean, you have a lot of these kids who want to be, and they think that if they present this, that makes them hard and that makes them acceptable. But we have these young brothers and sisters, some of them getting 4.0s and doing this, that, and other, and they won't talk about it. It's almost like they're ashamed that they're good students. I mean, we've got to stop that, because, I mean, it's ludicrous that we would even go down that road and feel ashamed that we're doing something positive and good for us and our folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Agreed. I think, like you said, Doc, some of these stories, they are the human interest stories. They are the heart-tugging stories. But I feel like there has to be some sort of border, some sort of line drawn at where do we cut it off? Where's the limit? That has to sort of be established as we continue on here. But want to talk about this shooting that happened at an AAU 11 and under tournament. A disagreement over a child's playing time resulted in a man being shot in the parking lot during this youth basketball tournament. Something has to change. What has to change, AD?
His playing time. I mean, it's just like what Allen Iverson said about practice. I mean, this is youth basketball. It's youth basketball. Let these kids be kids. I mean, I just can't even fathom what makes somebody pull out their gun and shoot somebody because you weren't playing my kid. I mean, it makes you scratch your head.
I'm from Cleveland, and Cleveland don't need any more bad news. But the dad was from Cleveland. But here's the problem. These AAU programs are charging more and more money now, and these parents saying, well, if I'm putting out this kind of money and we're driving from Cleveland to Detroit or Toledo or Columbus, I expect my kid to play. And what I'm trying to figure out, if you are a coach, can't you give pretty much everybody at least equal playing time in the first half? Or have conversations with parents, say, hey, here's how the playing time is going to go. But what is happening, some of these clubs are taking money from these parents. And here's what they say. Well, now understand, you're not paying all this money for games. You playing for training. Hell no. If we're going to Detroit and Chicago and I'm getting a hotel room and I'm taking off work and doing all this stuff, my son better play. So I understand the frustration.
Isn't that good? What if your
have
son
that conversation with the parent and say, you know what? The YMCA may be a better league for your son. But what I have seen, Lericia, is that some of these AAU coaches don't really have a career, don't really have a job. This becomes their hustle, right? So they say we have tryouts, but basically, if you can pay, we will put you on a team.
So that young man takes my son's playing time, then I'm going to go to the car and get my gun, shoot him because you've taken my son's playing time. Just joking, folks. But here's the deal. That's a mentality we're dealing with. So, it just continues to perpetuate. And Doc, you're absolutely right. Most of these, well, let me back up. I'm not going to say most of these people, but my experience has been that I've seen some of these people that are coaching, the only place they found and know how and learned how to coach is like me and you. They watch TV.
Wow. Yeah.
There is no formal training. I mean, if you go to Europe and you look at all these club teams, you have to get certified.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I'm going to go back a little bit. When we talk about policing in our country, most policemen in other countries have to go 1-2 years through training. I believe in our country, it's 6 months. So, again, it's those kind of things that we need to look at. And then we wonder why we have issues.
Kevin, you said something the other day. You said that the youth sports thing is the parents are more out of control at the younger levels than they are when they get to middle school and high school. Why is that?
It's amazing, but you have these 6 and 7 year olds playing Pop Warner. And I mean, the whole family, the whole community would be out there. And as they progress on, so you go to the 4th, 5th, 6th graders, the fans tend to leave. I have no idea why that is, but that's been my experience in looking at this. And I mean, again, and the arguments and the fights and the profanity thrown at coaches and everybody else with some of these games, it's mind-boggling and unbelievable. And then we wonder why the kids sometimes act the way they do.
Yeah, and we have to do something. But Lericia, you talked about this the other day. You pushed back a little bit, but I think, Lericia, that the reason we as Black folk go all in on sports, and Lericia, I want to get your response to this. I really believe that this is the only place in the workplace in America where we feel that the playing field is level, meaning that, if I have the talent, I will get opportunity. What's your take on that, Lericia?
I don't necessarily agree with that, because it doesn't matter where you are, whatever industry or entity that you are in this world. It's unfortunate that we live in a nation where sometimes you're going to encounter that. And as a person who has been in the sports realm, as a person who is in the sports industry now, as a female reporter and a Black female reporter at that, I haven't escaped it. So how can you say it's an even playing field when a lot of this industry, whether you're playing or not, is about who you know?
Wow.
And the connections and relationships that you have with someone. So I don't necessarily agree that this is where you feel like it's a level playing field. No, it's not a level playing field. Sometimes to me, it's almost as if we don't have that period. Like there is no even playing field for us, for people of color, the Black and brown community. And it's unfortunate to even say that.
So let me ask you this. When you were doing the LSU game, LSU spring game, you go to the press box or whatever, how many other African-American reporters did you see?
Well, of course, because of COVID, everything is totally different. But I was on the field, so I didn't necessarily see too many other African-American reporters. And then they had the reporters all spread out. So I can't honestly say if there were a certain number.
But typically, on a typical regular college football season, what would you typically see if you go do a game in the ACC or the SEC?
It depends on the location of it, but you might see maybe one or two.
Wow.
One or two, and that might be inclusive of myself. And that's just being honest.
So, hey, Doc, could I share an LSU story with you?
Please.
Okay. See, you're already starting to laugh. So I was working at UC Berkeley, and we were playing in the baseball regionals down in LSU. So it was early before the game, and I went early, and I'm sitting in the stands. And so this older white gentleman came by, and he sat down and he started talking to me, and he said, "You're not from around here, are you, boy?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm not." He said, "Well, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm with the University of California, Berkeley." And so I said, "Well, what makes you think that I'm not from around there?" He said, "Well, usually your kind don't sit here." Oh, wow. So at that moment, one of the ushers came by and asked to see our tickets. So I pulled my ticket out and showed her my ticket, and he pulled his out. And she said, "Excuse me, sir, your tickets are down in right field." And so I just told him, I said, "I hope you have a great day. Enjoy the baseball."
Good old Tigers, boy. I spent good 9 years there,
All right. Now, moving on to a beautiful, beautiful story that we all see unfold with Charlie Collier, the WNBA first draft pick in this year's draft. She actually honored her father. She honored her father's memory with resilience. And she had a dedication to him when talking about him during the WNBA draft. She unfortunately lost her father to cancer, and he was one of her biggest supporters and her favorite playing rival. Doc, when you saw this story and when you heard about the connection that she had with her father. How would you describe your reactions?
You know, I'm just so proud of her. Never had the opportunity to teach her, you know, interacted with her a number of times, but never had the opportunity to teach her. But, you know, it's just a story of resilience. You know, that, you know, you followed the story on ESPN, you know, her dad died when she was a senior. And one of her memories is that, you know, as he was getting sick, I think dying of lung cancer, you know, she got invited to, I think, to be a part of the Olympic team or the 17 and under team or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it's just a great story. Number one, you know, we need more stories where dads are there. And it just goes to show the power of resilience. You know, Vic Schaefer came in as coach this year at Texas, replacing Karen Aston. And I think Schaefer really took Collier's game to another level. So for a lot of us in and around Texas, a lot of us Longhorns fans, we were very, very excited for her. She's a hard worker, a phenomenal young woman. And we look forward to seeing her doing well, both on and off the court.
AD.
The sad part is that her father wasn't able to continue to experience this. But again, what a wonderful story. And that, you know, the myth is that we do have mothers and fathers raising our children, and that they are doing great and positive things. So, you know, I'm glad that was shared. I'm glad that people were able to see that and for people to experience it. And again, Leonard, you're absolutely right. What a wonderful young woman representing just the game of basketball.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Want to circle back now to the verdict that was handed down to former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. The law delivered justice for George Floyd. We saw so many people say this is accountability. This is what accountability looks like. And so we know that yesterday Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 charges against him in the killing of George Floyd. But I actually want us to take a step back and think about the entire area itself. How did we get here? Or how did we get here in Minnesota? Doc?
You know, when I'm doing these corporate trainings and stuff, you know, and I talk about the George Floyd case and how it was in many ways a classic example of institutional racism. The Minneapolis Police Department conspiring with the district attorney's office, then conspiring with the medical examiner to say that George Floyd, you know, died of, you know, a heart disease or something crazy like that. You know, and I tell people, if that can happen in a liberal state like Minnesota, in a liberal city like Minneapolis, with a liberal governor, a liberal mayor, Minneapolis, you know, we have problems. But there's always, Lericia, been this dual standard of law enforcement in the African-American community. You know, we, in many ways, were the police force in many ways were created to, you know, be slave patrols. And it has just continued down through the centuries. One thing that many people don't know is that during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, when you had the disturbances in Watts, Detroit, DC, Cleveland, Huff, other places, is that as more Black folks moved to the north, Northern politicians would specifically recruit white Southerners to come and join police forces, right? Because they felt like white Southerners knew best how to control and keep Black people in line. So although these cities were in the north and things of that nature, the police forces were largely white and largely Southern.
So I want to present this to you all too, as we sort of move to the portion of the show where we talk about solutions, right? We know that this verdict was handed down, and AD, you said it as we started the show, it was a sense of relief. But people, we knew that depending on what the verdict was, right, there would either have been a celebration, which we did see celebration take place, or there would have been protests. Now that we know what the verdict is and we saw that people were celebrating, is it wrong for people to celebrate after feeling let down for no justice for so long? Because we know that this is a bittersweet moment, and we do not like to celebrate the demise of someone else's life. But is it wrong for people to celebrate in this particular situation?
I don't think wrong is probably the right word that we should be using. It's sad and it's disappointing that we experience these kind of things, and that we're so accustomed for it working the other way that when it does happen, we find that we do celebrate these things. Yeah. And, the question is, how do we move on? And that we don't have to do this. But we just talked about it. Ironically, that this verdict is handed out yesterday, and today or yesterday, we have another African-American child killed by the hands of the police. I mean, you would think that there would be a message somewhere where when we've gone through all this, when we've had these rebellions, because Doc, you're absolutely right. They talk about we go in and we riot and we loot and we do everything else. No. We're rebelling. We won't stand for this anymore. And the ironic thing about all of this is that had COVID not been in place and that whole George Floyd wouldn't have been on TV, none of that would have happened. But since we were all home and there were a lot of our white brothers and sisters and Latins and everything else who saw this, they knew it was wrong, and we went out and we mass protested these things. Because, people saw that George Floyd was murdered. No question about it. But the sad part about it is that gentleman who murdered him was very passive yesterday when they came and handcuffed him and took him away.
Lericia, was interesting to me is that, how these NBA players were basically saying, like I said, the NBA was prepared to cancel games. You know what I mean? And I mean, that is so exciting to see these young professional athletes. I think the WNBA led the way getting involved in social justice issues. But, then you hear ignorant statements by Brett Favre. Ignorant from Brett Favre. All right. Remember, he's from Kiln, Mississippi, went to USM. He was at USM when I was at Jackson State. So here's the deal. So he said the other day, he's tired of politics interfering with sports. And it's like, no, Brett, you aren't tired of politics interfering with sports. You were tired of Black politics interfering with sports. And it's like, Brett, let me tell you, brother, it's 2021. You don't have the luxury of just escaping and just watching a game. And it amazes me how upset people get when their political views aren't being expressed. But, we are a country, we value freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and all of that. But then he said something else today, I think related to the Chauvin verdict. And so Brett Favre, it's ironic. He's trying to tell basically Black athletes to shut up and dribble. But brother, you ain't played in 9 or 10 years. In many ways, you need in many ways to come away from the microphone because your political commentary, not only is it ignorant, it doesn't add to the, it does not add in many ways to the solution.
Well, if we look at our history, it always comes after the fact. You had Joe Johnson. I mean, you had Muhammad Ali. Now, when I was coming up in the 60s, folks hated Muhammad Ali because he stood for something that was right and just, but they didn't see it. And now that he's passed on, but they immortalize him. So if we look at this, it always takes us a great period of time to realize what was going on. Prime example now is Colin Kaepernick. So most people now understand what that brother was doing and why he was on his knee and what he was trying to bring forward in an example and have us see this. And, George Floyd had to lose his life in order for people to understand what Colin was really calling them out and wanting them to see.
And I think it is a very bittersweet sort of moment, and it is very bittersweet for that particular area because justice had to be served, but yet someone lost his life. That was a phrase of what Karl Anthony Towns stated after the Minnesota Timberwolves game on Tuesday night. And it's true. Someone had to lose their life, unfortunately, in this situation, but yet the law delivered justice to George Floyd. And as many people have tweeted out and said verbally and vocally as well, accountability. We saw accountability. And though this verdict will not erase the millions of injustices that have faced the African American community, I think it is one step in the right direction, and it is a sign of hope. It is a sigh of relief as well. And our prayers and our hearts go out to the family of George Floyd, as well as the young teenager who lost her life as well in Columbus, Ohio, Micaiah Bryant. Our hearts and prayers are with her family as well. Before we let you all go on the live stream, and as we wrap up the show, we cannot forget about our segment that we like to call "Who Put Raisins in the Potato?"
Oh, hell no, Karen.
Are you guys?
Keep your brand ass potato salad to yourself.
Are you guys ready for this one? Right? Okay, so
Yep.
a soldier stationed at Fort Jackson in South Carolina. He has now been charged with a misdemeanor assault after a video circulated showing him being brutal, in essence, to a black man walking inside a local subdivision. You can see it right here on your screen. This video went viral, went completely viral. And I know a lot of people were upset by it, with the statements that were made within the video, with the comments that were made within the video, the pushing and shoving that took place in the video, because it shows the white man shouting at the young black man on the sidewalk. And it also shows sort of like a hostile exchange. And the man's wife is the one who's actually recording it. Well, black people doing what black people do. They let Mr. Jonathan Petland, who again is a soldier, they let him know that he put raisins in the potato salad because there was a protest and rally outside of his home. And there was a video circulating of a young woman a young black woman, black women are always at the forefront of things, Doc. You
Oh,
said
hell
it.
no, Karen.
You said it, Doug. But it was a video of her up front, outside of his home, yelling out, "We just want to talk to you. Where you at? You gonna come outside?
Oh,
We just
hell
want to
no,
talk to
Karen.
you." So, Jonathan Petland, you put raisins in the potato salad because
Oh, hell no, Karen.
we hope you didn't think that the black community was gonna let this one slide here. AD, when you saw this and heard about the rally that took place outside of his house, were you shocked at the response?
I couldn't believe it, but then I thought originally they were waiting for him to invite them in the backyard because he was out there barbecuing. And then later on, I found out what the gist of the story is. So nothing surprises me anymore. People take liberty and they think that when they're isolated and there's nobody pointing the camera at them or that there's nobody there, that they can say anything to us or our children. But now he's hiding when the community just wanted to knock on his door and say, "Hey, yo, what's up? we want to talk with you." Brave man there to encounter that 13-year-old boy. But when his folks came, different man.
Oh,
But
hell
you know
no,
what's funny
Karen.
about all this? What was funny is that in the dialogue, the soldiers yelling at the boy, "How long you been living here? How long you been living here?" The reporter wrote that the soldier just moved there 5 months ago, and the boy been living there for much longer than the soldier. So it was like, it's just funny that you asking that guy, first you say he didn't live there, then he said, "I do live here." It's like, "Well, how long you been living here?" He like, "Well, actually, bro, I need to be asking you that question because I was here before you got there." So yes, that brother did put the raisins in the potato salad this week.
He definitely did. Definitely put raisins in the potato salad. Before we again let you all go, want to get your final thoughts again as we wrap up the show. I know, AD, you said it was a sign of relief as we heard the verdict for Derek Chauvin yesterday. Your final thoughts?
Living in Los Angeles and reflecting on this and what Rodney King said, it would be great if we can all just get along. And there's no reason why we can't.
Doc?
Lericia, I want to give a shout out to Black Rob, who died last week.
There we go. Yeah.
That song, Whoa, I was teaching at LSU. It's 99, my second year on the faculty. Every morning when I got up, Kevin, I would get into work. I go to work. I hop in the Mitsubishi Eclipse, all right? And I would play Black Rob, Whoa. That was my theme song for like 2 or 3 years because it just got me hyped. And I listen to the clean version now, but it just got me hyped and it got me ready to engage. So Black Rob, rest in power.
The clean
Absolutely.
version, Doc. The
Clean version, Lericia.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to my line sister, Linda. It's a look with Linda and her LLC that she has. There's always money to be made. I always like to wear a shirt representing a small Black business or just a Black business in general. And this is her brand. This is her shirt. There's always money to be made. And I know you two can definitely attest and agree with that.
That's right.
There's always money to be made. We greatly appreciate you all joining us for another episode of Fourth and Just Us. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube. And whenever we're talking and we're having a conversation, don't forget to drop your comments as well. Again, we appreciate you joining the conversation where we intertwine race, politics, and sports. We'll see you all next time.
Just us.